Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. We're supposed to have a really esteemed guest on tonight, ABC News legal analyst Matt Murphy, and he's had some really strong opinions about the plea bargain with Bryan Kohberger, and his opinions weren't good. He criticized the prosecution because he felt that this was a extremely strong case, the kind of case that you should go forward with. And the promise to the families were that they would go for the death penalty. And this was a death penalty case. And then a week before, the defense went into the prosecution and said that they would be willing to plead guilty for four counts. They would plead guilty to murder in the first degree, capital murder. And in exchange, he would take a sentence of life without parole. But there's always some fugazi thing. I'm using my New York lingo. There's always the devil's in the details, as they say. And Matt Murphy was arguing on other shows that, potentially 4 sentences of life without parole could mean 10 years on each. So that's 40 years. And then a consecutive 10 years for the burglary. However, most of us don't realize that could be what's going on here. But Matt Murphy did. And he enlightened us with that. Anyway, folks, hold on to your hats, hold on to your loved ones, hold on to your opinions. You're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone, the police off-the-cuff zone.
There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
And now a word from our sponsor. BetOnline continues to be your number one source for all your sports betting action. And with baseball in full swing and football season around the corner, BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting. From Major League Baseball, UFC to tennis and NFL futures, BetOnline remains your choice for sports wagering info. In between games, head over to the BetOnline Casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker and live casino. Head to the website today and take advantage of their industry-leading VIP program with level-up bonuses and weekly cash boosts. BetOnline, the game starts here. So, folks, what we are a little bit baffled with is sort of how the family was mistreated in this case in a way that they were promised the prosecution, really, for a death penalty case. And the rug was pulled out on them the week before that that Bryan Kohberger appeared in court and accepted the plea. So we're going to talk about that. And Matt Murphy has just arrived, I'm happy to say. So we're going to be putting him on the air. But first, I'm going to introduce to you my co-host, retired NYPD Sergeant, professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, attorney. Welcome to the show, Professor Mike Geary. Mike, welcome.
Bill, good evening. Thank you for having me on. Thank you.
I want to also give Matt Murphy the kind of introduction that he deserves. And one of the things is I have his book. I'm holding it up here. Now there we go. The Book of Murder, because of the green screen I was getting. That's his book. It's really an amazing book. For those that have worked homicides before and those who haven't, it's truly an amazing book. And I want to read what he writes on the back of the book. For 17 years, if a murder was committed in the cities of Newport Beach, Costa Mesa, Irvine, or Laguna Beach, California, I was there, behind the yellow tape, often shivering in the cold with my detectives and my team. Whenever there's a big crime story and we read about how they charged the criminal defendant with this or they arrested him for that, they is really a reference to the prosecutor. And in those cities for those years, they was actually just me. I did my first homicide scene, a young man with a broken heart. 17 years and a lifetime later, I left my final murder scene, an older man with a troubled but still hopeful soul. This book is the story of that journey. Now, specifically, we're not here to plug his book, but we're here to get his opinion on what the hell happened in the Bryan Kohberger case. So, without further ado, I'm going to welcome to the show retired Orange County District Attorney Matt Murphy, and he's also the legal analyst on ABC News. Matt, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me back, guys.
Good to see you,
Yeah,
Matt.
it's a real thrill, and I've watched you appear on some of the other shows, but you're here with us, the real homicide deal, you know. So I've shivered behind the crime scene tape myself. You know, I've been to a lot of horrific scenes in my 27-year police career. My last 10 was in homicide, and I was also in El Barrio, the 2-3 precinct, 5 years before that. So I saw a lot of murder and mayhem. But let's get right to the Bryan Kohberger case because I noted, and Mike and I will give our opinions, but we want to hear your opinions because you're the most learned here and the most experienced here in regards to prosecuting murders. And I was surprised at a little bit at your take on this.
Well, I sat on our Special Circumstances Committee for 15 years. And basically, our job was to review every murder case that came through with a special circumstance. So, a generic murder like domestic violence case or a bar fight, or a lot of times even drug dealers fighting over, drugs or money or whatever. A lot of those cases are they're generic murders. Special circumstance homicides are ones that are committed during the course of a robbery or a rape or a kidnapping. So that's it's really the next echelon up above your average murder, if there can be such a thing. And they're the most heinous and the most disturbing of the murders. And of those, what we would do is every time there was a special circumstance, we would have to review that and determine suitability for the death penalty. And we would do that. We'd make a recommendation to the elected DA of Orange County, and you would base that on a series of factors. And that's aggravating versus mitigating, which is the law. So you look at things like the vulnerability of the victim, whether the defendant was under any sort of mental disturbance or mental defect that may have lessened their ability to appreciate the enormity of what they were doing, or whether they were under the substantial influence of another person. And you compare these things and you make a recommendation about whether or not to seek the death penalty. And I did that in case after case. And we recommended the death penalty in less than 4% of the cases that qualified. So it was a really, really small number that we would seek the death penalty. And there's a famous Supreme Court case where they're trying to define pornography. And you guys might remember this. And the justice, and his name escapes me right now, said, "I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it." Okay. Death penalties are really very similar to that. We wouldn't seek it on dope rips, or almost never on a robbery gone bad. We would seek it on the truly most depraved and disturbing cases like this one. And this is one of those cases that it's kind of hard to put in a definition of when the death penalty is appropriate, but I know it when I see it. And the Bryan Kohberger case, I believe, is one of those cases, right? So this DA went through that process, and part of it in Orange County, we would call them livesy hearings. Part of that very somber, formal process is we would even invite the defense team in to present any evidence they had in mitigation that they asked the DA to consider. And this is something that, even though there's a moratorium on the death penalty in California, Gavin Newsom, all that, something that the committee that I sat on and also our DA took very, very seriously. And there were plenty of cases where it looked like it was going to go death, and the defense would come in and present evidence of mitigation. Might be legitimate abuse in childhood. Sometimes that actually happens. it could be a variety of other things. And I watched our old DA, Tony Rukakis, change his mind right before my eyes and actually go against the recommendation of the deputy assigned to the case more than once, including on one of mine.
Matt, I feel like I'm almost sitting in a law class right now, and
Yeah,
and,
sorry. I don't know if that's too boring.
Good.
but it's great
Yeah.
because it's necessary to understand that. But I just want to give you my perspective as a NYPD former sergeant that worked in homicide, and I almost feel like this is, well, I've said this on several shows, the death penalty has been hijacked by a political group of people, specifically on the left wing. And you may say the ACLU, the Innocence Project, and Amnesty International. I think that they have an interest in some reason to fight every single case. And because of that, it could take 25 years to actually mete out the sentence after someone, say specifically like Bryan Kohberger, gets convicted. It's not over for the families. He's not going to get the death penalty maybe for 20, 25 years because it'll be endless appeals. And, that's why I think these three groups have hijacked the law and they just get endless, and who's financing all of this? It's private funds that's financing this, the Amnesty Internationals, the Innocence Projects, and the ACLU to fight every single death penalty case because they are against it as a matter of ideology.
Well, I agree with you. There are people, and look, I think that there are definitely valid philosophical or religious reasons that some people hold very, very earnestly, where they believe the death penalty is wrong, and I respect that. But the death penalty in 27 states, including California and the federal system, is the law. And there are families, including the Gonzalez family in this case, that believe very strongly. And you talk about those three groups. There are some arguments you hear that kind of drive me crazy, and I could go through those. It could probably take up your whole show, but there are, like I said, there are legitimate reasons why the death penalty is a good thing to debate, right? It's just a lot of times those legitimate reasons, you don't hear those proposed by that other side. And one of the things is, well, it'd be so much worse to sit in a jail cell and think about what he did for all that time. That is I'm sorry, can I swear on this? That's just a bullshit argument. They don't think like we do. People who commit the worst of the worst murders, a guy like Bryan Kohberger, he got off on that. He did it because he wanted to do it. He did it because he thought it'd be interesting or fun. I believe that there was almost certainly a sexual component to that, contrary to the
something
prosecutors.
That 100%. We said that the other night. And
right.
You noticed that Bill Thompson, he said when he was taking the plea or presenting his evidence, he said there was absolutely no sexual assault in this. Yeah, but
he said
the whole thought was,
the words he used on that, not to cut you off or step on you, the words he used were there was no sexual component or sexual assault. That's what he said. To say there was no completed sexual assault, fine. That sounds accurate. To say there's no sexual component was, if you saw me on Megyn Kelly, I lost my mind when I heard that. And we listened to it live on her show, and he said that. I took notes. I had to go back and read it like 3 times because I couldn't believe that he said that. He can't crawl into the brain of a guy named Bryan Kohberger and figure out exactly what he was thinking, but he did seem obsessed about those young women. He was following them on social media. They were all pretty. He was also obsessed with Ted Bundy. And anybody who knows even the basics of the Ted Bundy case, he sexually assaulted every single one of his victims. Another thing is there was a study performed by the FBI, one of the seminal studies in this area, and they determined that a hefty majority of serial killers are they sexually violate their victims. And that's something that everybody knows. There's this almost myth out there of Buffalo Bill, right? We all watch Silence of the Lambs, and Buffalo Bill is this tortured, sympathetic character that's killing women to steal their skin because he wants to metamorphosize into somebody. And it's based on a real guy. That's the exception, not the rule, in my experience in serial killers. And look, I prosecuted personally 13 people that satisfy the FBI definition over the course of my career, including the Golden State Killer, the dating game killer. I had case after case, and we reviewed a couple of hundred of these things on that committee. And look, there's almost always a sexual component. And so when he got up and said that, that was an outrageous thing for him to say. And then I'll tell you what really got me was when he started talking about at the end, his little like wrap up at the end. Remember when he started choking up and he got like a tear in his eye as he's invoking the victims? You know, you can't do that. And number one, as professional prosecutors, we would make fun of any guy that would go out there, any male defense lawyer or any male prosecutor who would squirt a few tears at the right time. It's a trope. It's performative. It's easy to do. There's that saying, no crying in baseball. There's no crying when you're giving a serial killer a break. And that's what he did. He gave Bryan Kohberger a break. I hate to say that. When they went through that process, they made the right call, in my opinion. And what you do is you change that decision based on something that has changed. What changed was my big question. And the defendant wanting to plead guilty is not a change in circumstance. I'll tell you, they all want to plead guilty. They all jump on pleading guilty when they're looking at the death penalty. And remember, when it comes to psychopaths or serial killers, which Bryan Kohberger shared a lot of, there's a thing called the hair psychopathy checklist, a lot of classic signs of a psychopath. He had a lot of those in his own writings. And when you're talking about a guy like that, the one person they care about on the world is themselves. And they all want to plead. And in a place like Idaho, he might just get executed one day. California has over 700 people on death row, including 8 of my former defendants that I prosecuted myself. There are, well, a couple of them have died now, but in Idaho, I think they've got 7 people on death row, I want to say, give or take 1 or 2. Right. He stood a very real chance of execution if he was convicted there. And that's what Bryan Kohberger wanted to avoid. And the DA gave it to him. And maybe there was some really good reason behind the scene. Maybe there was some really good piece of mitigating evidence that somebody presented him to make him change his mind. But we sure haven't heard that. And given the platform that he had when he took that plea, he sure didn't tell us that. The only change in this case, other than the court shooting down a bunch of avenues the defense wanted to pursue, I think very properly, by the way, the only thing that changed is Kohberger came and asked for a deal, and then they give the families, like, 48 hours to show up to court to watch that happen. That's, in my view, and again, this is my opinion, and look, I want to be fair here because I was a prosecutor for 26 years. I know how hard that job is. I know how difficult it is dealing with high-profile media cases, and I had quite a few. I had more than my share of big national high-profile cases. The pressures is immense, and I understand a lot of the things that they were going through. However, you give the family 48 hours, that's an outrageous thing. If that is true, that is outrageous. And there's a thing called Marcy's Law that's been adopted in multiple states. It's the Crime Victims Bill of Rights. And in the state of California, as wacky as it can be and as pro-defendant as it can be, even California has adopted this. And one of the constitutional rights that a crime victim has, and that includes immediate family of murder victims, like the Gonzalez family, one of the sacrosanct rights they have, their constitutional rights, is the ability to voice their concerns at any hearing where the court convenes, where the defendant is there. And they were denied that opportunity. Now, I think this judge, to his credit, did exactly the right thing, and he put over the formal sentencing in order to afford the family members an opportunity to address the court. I think that was the right thing to do. But that kind of disconnect, and look, it's dealing with families is hard. I did it for 17 years in a homicide. I did it for 4 years before that. You guys know that. Family members, dealing with them sometimes, it can be very tough. That's a part of the friggin' job. Like, welcome to the varsity leagues, buddy. That's a part of it. And the disconnect between the decisions that were being made and those family members, I don't understand it at all. And maybe there's great stuff that we haven't heard publicly, but we sure haven't heard it. And you had an opportunity to explain it, and he didn't explain it. And up to that point, I thought they'd done almost everything well. I was against them destroying the house. I think that was a rookie
100% I was too.
That was really
that
dumb.
Was so political, and it smelled of the University of Idaho.
Oh, that's what they did. Yeah, there's no question. They came out, they owned the building.
The owner of the house
wanted to do it.
Yeah,
and air quotes here. They thought it was good for healing. what a crock of crap that is.
Absolutely, that was bullshit.
these kids, they know exactly where it is, and you can just see some administrator wanting to insert themselves into such a famous case. The flip side of that is Bryan Kohberger also has rights. The idea that they destroyed the crime scene. I was shocked when that happened.
Yeah,
I was
it was
critical of
horrible.
it at the time. They shouldn't have done that. But look, my view of that, and maybe I'm wrong. I'm open to being presented with something else. It appeared to me that that prosecutor blinked, and you got to have the backbone to step into the batter's box and take a swing, and they didn't do it. And I was really disappointed. And I think Kohberger, I think he should face death penalty. Another thing, look, when I heard him give that recitation of the evidence that day in court, that we learned things that we didn't know before, like the fact that Bryan Kohberger had purchased a K-bar, that's a Marine Corps knife, next to the Roman gladius, that is probably the most vicious cutting instrument ever invented in the history of humanity. He bought one of those on Amazon, and then the sheath left at the scene with the DNA on it was a K-bar, which was totally consistent with the slaughter and the wounds of those poor
Yes.
four kids. And that was something we didn't know. The evidence, guys, in this case was absolutely overwhelming. So when you
But
got
I
overwhelming
have
evidence,
you
what's
on
that?
News Nation saying that like 2 years ago. That
Oh yeah,
the
it
evidence
was overwhelming. It
it
really was.
was.
And look, that phone evidence, and we've heard the defense talk about that, and they can always trot in some expert who says, "Oh, it's possible they relay." I have done a dozen murder cases at least where that cell phone evidence and where the phone was pinging was a critical component of our case. And you win that argument every single time because every juror has a cell phone, and it's like the science is so complex it's voodoo. But when it comes to the trail, it's like footprints on a beach. When you see him moving in the direction of the murderer until he turns his phone off, which is consciousness of guilt by itself, and then he turns the phone on back, and the timing syncs up perfectly. That was just like my Alejandro Avila case with the Samantha Runyon murder. And that was 2003. Jury's got it all the way back then. They're even more hip to that now. That's overwhelming evidence. This judge, I thought, was nonsense. He was making all the right calls up to that point.
Matt,
That's the kind of judge you win in front of.
let me stop
Sorry.
you for 1 second. The judge is one of the reasons that the defense went for the plea, because he was not putting up with any of their bullshit.
Yeah, that's right.
I know you have a certain view about the four would-be perpetrators that were part of the tips log. All of a sudden, they didn't build a case against them. They were just using that and, to create doubt, possibly. And, the other things that and the fact that he likes to drive around at night and look at the stars, all this absolute, and then, of course, the continuance, all the crap that they were trying to do. It was already 2.5 years. And Judge John Judge, the guy, he couldn't have got rid of this case fast enough. Yeah. I'm going to give you a change of venue. Ship it to Boise. Let me get the hell. I don't want anything to do with this case. But he would have been a disaster if he did sit on that case because he was too lenient. The other thing I want to just mention, there's not a murderer on this earth that wants to take the death penalty. They want their life. They want to stay alive. And you're 100% right. They're not going to say, "Oh, yes, give me the death penalty." No, they want to be alive. And people don't realize that. You see the baddest asses, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of them in California. They're all, when it comes time that they could lose their life, and it comes time when a cop's got his 9mm drilled into the side of their head, "Please, officer, don't pull the trigger." They're not tough anymore.
Yeah, that's right. And look, that if that's the only change of circumstance, it's a shameful plea, in my view. And yes, those trials are brutal, but so is every murder case. And yeah, look, it's a good point that the appellate process is very lengthy, but for a lot of family members, even if it is not, even if there's no execution carried out in California, I would talk to every family member about, hey, look, chances are virtually nil that this guy's ever going to get executed. But there's a cathartic aspect for a lot of family members to hear the jury come back as the voice of the community and say, "Mr. Defendant, not only did you do it, but this was such a depraved murder, and the victim was so valuable, you deserve to die for what you did. Even if you're never actually executed, you deserve to die." That really does help certain family members. It really does. And I think it would have helped the Gonzalez family to hear that. And yeah, the appellate scrutiny is is intense, as it should be when you're talking about the death penalty. But that's called don't screw up the case, and cases do get reversed. That's a part of the of the process,
Right.
But these cases, and look, every murder is appealed forever. But another disturbing part about this, guys, is that unless my math is wrong, he's looking at a 10-year minimum for each murder consec. So that's 40 years plus whatever time you get, accepting the 10-year max for the burglary. So he's going to get something. He's going to get a parole hearing. Even if Idaho law stays the same, he's going to get a parole hearing sometime inside of 50 years, which means this guy has the chance of getting out. That's a bad deal for everybody.
Matt, we from New York City never underestimate the stupidity of the criminal justice system, because Governor Cuomo has released more cop killers whose sentence was life without the possibility of parole. And
That's
here
right.
we are, 25, 30, 40 years after they killed a cop, they're getting parole. He's granting them amnesty. So the state can do whatever the hell they want. Mike, I'm going to give you a few words since you haven't said a word.
Oh, no, I was just listening to Matt, because it's learning a lot more about prosecution behind the scenes stuff than I ever realized. But I just had a question for you, Matt. You alluded to there must have been a change of circumstance. And is it possible? And I think Steve Gonsalves, God bless him, he alluded to this when he was criticizing the prosecution. He said, everything was go, 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 go. We're going to try this case as a death penalty case, until Judge Hippler said he wanted to do an investigation into how law enforcement, who in law enforcement leaked information to the media, where they had that big special on TV. And Steve Gonsalves alluded to that. And then I started thinking, is it possible that the change of circumstances was that there was going to be some information that before the trial even began might be leaked to the defense, like the OJ case and Mark Furman, when they dirtied him up by beating him up on the witness stand, not about anything to do with the murder of OJ's wife and Ron Goldman, but had everything to do with his participation in writing a script where he used the N-word, and they dirtied him up. Do you think it's possible that maybe Steve Gonsalves was right on about that there was going to be some dirty information coming out, that Ann Taylor would be able to beat up some of the cops?
Well, I sure hope not, number one, because that's even worse than the defendant wanting to plead guilty. So that wouldn't be a proper change of circumstance to offer a plea. And some DAs have done that. Look, I'll leave the DA's name out of it, but I had a DA that did that on one of, I won't say on my cases, I'll give away who it is. But no, sometimes they do that when there's something that's going to make the DA look terrible, and they think they can get rid of it by just not going for death. On this one, I can't imagine this judge would have. I think that would have been a side issue. He asked for an investigation to see who was leaking information. I don't think that would have necessarily been admissible unless the defense had a really good claim to that. Right. I have a feeling that because the court would, I think that the court would exclude that from cross-examination interview. In California, we call it 402. Or a motion in limine to exclude that. Right. Also, I'd like to think that investigation won't end simply because the case pled. When it comes to leaks, I got a great nugget of advice. I was actually on the Samantha Running case. Some of you guys might remember that one. It was a 6-year-old girl kidnapped by a guy named Alejandro Avila. She was raped and murdered in Orange County back in 2002, 2003. He said we had a lot of leaks on that case. We did not have a gag order, but it was driving my detectives crazy because every time they'd find something, it was mysteriously winding up in the media, before they could even put it in a report. And it turned out it was one of their higher ups that was leaking it.
I was going to say that smells of a chief.
No, and it wasn't the chief. It was another guy, and their chief wound up. The actual sheriff wound up going to federal prison for a few years for an unrelated thing, but. His upper echelon was a little unsavory in the view of some, and anyway, I went in. It was driving me crazy. It was driving my detectives crazy, and I went into my boss, and I was a very junior prosecutor. This is the first death penalty case I was ever handed. And um, I remember going into his office and he said, leaks are like ghosts. He said they're really scary at first, but when you really think about it, nobody's ever actually been hurt by a ghost that you know, and nobody's ever going to admit doing it. You're never going to catch one on video, and at the end of the day, it's just not going to hurt you. And that was his take, and I took that to heart. And it's true. These leaks. The media was going nuts with it, but at the end of the day, in Idaho especially, remember, you're entitled to what's known as a death qualified jury. It's not
Yes.
just random people. It means it's 12 deliberating jurors that are in support of the death penalty that can impose the death penalty if they determine it to be the appropriate punishment. So that means that all the people that are philosophically, religiously opposed, ideologically opposed, like if you're on the ACLU or if you give money to Project Innocence, and don't even get me started on that. You're going to be off the jury under those circumstances. You're going to get a bunch of sober, serious people who can impose the death penalty. In the state of Idaho, man, I like my chances as a prosecutor on that. So these guys had all the stars aligned. They really, really did. They were going to get a great jury. They already had a great judge, and they had overwhelming evidence. And I really hope that Mr. Gonzalez is wrong, that this wasn't an attempt to cover up somebody that's about to get busted for that. Because I don't think I don't think it would have any ultimate impact on the outcome of the case, other than making somebody perhaps embarrassed. There was that Dateline episode where they clearly were getting information from somebody involved in the case. But I don't know. It's like I don't think anybody will admit to it. It's like a ghost. I don't think they're ever going to actually find who did it. And I cannot. Maybe it's naive of me. I just don't want to think that somebody would make a decision that important and disappoint at least one of those four families as profoundly as they did the Gonzalez family for something that stupid. I just maybe he's exactly right. But I really hope that that's not it.
Matt, from the chat, the Richards Art, Bill Thompson very, very adamantly declared in court that Bryan Christopher Kohberger in no way whatsoever stalked or knew these kids. I think that's absolute bullshit.
It's total bullshit. It is incorrect. That is factually untrue, man. Just based on the information that we have. His social media must be down, but in my prep for some of the commentary I've done on this, his list on social media, he was following at least two of the women that lived in that house. He drove that car there multiple times. So I don't know what his definition of stalking is, but it would probably, maybe he's getting hyper technical because he never threatened them, which is required at least under the California Penal Code for a completed stalking. But clearly he is keying in on them for a reason. And look, it's like Mike Tyson says, right? Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right, guys? So he went in there with the intent to do something, and I guarantee I can't guarantee. I believe, my personal opinion, there had to be a sexual component to it. He breaks in, and remember, he thought one young woman was going to be in that bed, and it turns out there was two. And from that point on, his plan, whatever it was, falls apart. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So it goes pear-shaped, and he winds up slaughtering 4 kids.
Yeah, but something, I think that in essence, the gag order hurt the case more than it helped the case, because it sort of gave cover to the district attorney from having to do his job and do what he was supposed to do.
And then what does he do in that hearing? And I couldn't believe this. The guy pled, and what did he ask the court to do? Did you guys catch that? Keep the gag order in place until sentencing.
Oh.
What a spineless, gelatinous freaking move that is. Like, buddy, you're the elected DA. You made a decision. Take the friggin' heat. Let the public see what's out there. Let people talk about it. Instead, it's going to be over by the time he faces any criticism or any criticism based on newly released evidence or people that are going to come and talk. I can't wait to hear from some of these detectives. And some of them may be towing the party line, but I guarantee there are some very disappointed police officers with that decision as well.
I wanted to just mention something because I saw that you were on Megyn Kelly the other night with Howard Bloom. And I've been very critical of Howard Bloom during this whole case. I don't know how he got this thing. Howard Bloom, the expert, he doesn't know shit about homicide. He doesn't. But He's a good writer. I'll tell him that. But I hate that these TV hosts, Megyn Kelly specifically, puts him on this pedestal like Howard Bloom. As I said, he's not law enforcement. He's not an attorney. He's not a prosecutor. He's a writer for the New York Times. Please
Yeah.
stop it.
The one thing I'll give him credit for, though, is he had the same reaction that we did to that. He came in, he was super critical of them tearing the house down, and he was if you watch the episode, he was pissed at this whole thing, and he was, I was trying to be, as an attorney, I'm trying to be at least somewhat circumspect, and I'm trying to give credit where credit is due, and I'm trying to extend fairness even when I got to hold my nose to do it. He had no problem going right after Thompson. So, at least I think he understands sort of the outrage, at least on an emotional level, that a lot of those families feel. Or a lot of people feel.
If the shoe fits, you got to wear it. Let me just play a bit of this right here. This is Judge Hippler.
To count one burglary, the state would have to have proven that on or about November 13, 2022 in Latah County, Idaho, you unlawfully entered a residence located at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder. As to count two, the state would have had to have proven that on or about that same date in Latah County, Idaho, you did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought, kill and murder Madison Mogen, a human being, by stabbing Madison Mogen, from which she died. As to count three, the state would have had to have proven that on that same date in Latah County, at that same address, you did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought, kill and murder Kaylee Gonzalez, a human being, by stabbing her, from which she died. As to count four, the state would have had to have proven that on or about that same date in Latah County, Idaho, you did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought, kill and murder Xana Kernodle, a human being, by stabbing her, from which she died. And then as to count five, also murder in the first degree, that on or about November 13th, 2022, in Latah County, Idaho, you did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought, kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being, by stabbing him, from which he died. Do you understand those things the state would have had to have proven?
Yes.
And do you understand that by pleading guilty, the state no longer has to prove those things because you're admitting those things are true?
Yes.
I want to also make for the record, the defendant has provided with the guilty plea advisory form a document entitled Written Factual Basis that purports to have the defendant's signature dated 1 July 2025. Did you sign that document?
Yes.
And did you agree with the written factual basis that is included there?
Yes.
And then let me ask you, did you, on November 13th, 2022, enter the residence at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder?
Yes.
Did you, on November 13th, 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, kill and murder Madison Mogen, a human being?
Yes.
And did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, and with premeditation and malice aforethought?
Yes.
Did you, on or about that same date in Moscow, Idaho, kill and murder Kaylee Gonzalez, a human being?
Yes.
And did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, and with premeditation and malice aforethought?
Yes.
And did you, on that same date in Moscow, Idaho, kill and murder Xana Kernodle, a human being?
Yes.
And did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought?
Yes.
And then on or about November 13th, 2022, again, in Latah County, Idaho, did you kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being?
Yes.
Did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought?
Yes.
Thank you.
So I wasn't quick enough to stop Chris Cuomo. Anyway, one of the things we that have been following this case, and everyone that's been following this case, we were expecting an allocution. There was no allocution. The number one thing I would have asked, and I hope it can be asked, what'd you do with the knife?
Yeah, well,
is that-
the allocution, if the court affords him an opportunity to do that, that'll be at sentencing. He would be given an opportunity to address the court at sentencing. I think that under these circumstances, the way that goes a lot of times is, like on our Golden State Killer case, after I left the DA's office, they decided to let him plead. It's another thing that I don't want to be too harsh in my criticism, because there were a million pages of discovery on that, and that was never going to go to trial. But they did the allocution on that, so the victim's family spoke, and then Joseph D'Angelo, an absolute monster, he got the last word. So I hope that the court handles it differently, and it's up to the court's discretion. And I hope he lets Kohberger talk first, and then gives the families the last word. I hope that goes. If Kohberger decides to address the court, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't. I mean, what's he going to say? The other thing, these trials oftentimes don't come with a whole lot of answers. The answers come with the evidence. Like, one of the things that I've read, although it hasn't been released officially yet, is that he was doing pornography searches for people that are asleep. That there were porn searches on his computer, and I haven't verified that yet. But you talk about a strong evidence of the sexual component to this. So I don't know what Kohberger could say in the way of an allocution, other than "I'm really sorry," and then who cares? I don't know.
Can't the allocution be based upon questions he's being asked by the judge?
The court could ask, I suppose, but I've never seen one done that way. I've only seen, you want to address the court, I'll give you an opportunity to do that. And I'll tell you just a quick war story. I had a case called Andrew Urdialis. He was a Marine that turned into a serial killer. His first known murder was in 1986. Got caught after murdering a bunch of sex workers in Gary, Indiana, and in Chicago. And then turns out that he was murdering sex workers and also innocent women in the California desert as well. So he came in for his statement and allocution, and the court let him talk. And he said the whole jury was there to watch. So he'd been sentenced to death. And he said, I want to extend my condolences to the family. I see that a lot of the jurors are here. And he said, I just want to say that if I was on the jury with you folks, I would have reached the same conclusion that you did. And we're all kind of thinking that he was blowing smoke, whatever. And he went up and he committed suicide within a couple of weeks, up on death row, after he got transported to San Quentin. And he carried out the sentence himself, a lot of people thought, at the end of that. So they can be interesting. I don't know if it's going to bring much in the way of satisfaction to these poor families. I mean, I hope it would, but I'm a little skeptical of that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, maybe Steve Gonsalves will make a good impact statement. I mean, he's so beat up. I mean, you could see the toll that this case has taken on him. And I would imagine any parent that lost their 21-year-old daughter to this violent act would feel similar to him. But he has been somewhat a voice of the families, even though the other families didn't agree to have him be the voice. And I have mentioned numerous times Ethan Chapin's family, who I find to be the salt of the earth. They're just unbelievable people. But I could never be like them. You know what I mean? Vengeance would be mine. I am Hammurabi. I'm not the people that we choose to focus on positive things, which is probably the best thing you could do. It's not in my DNA. Mike, your thoughts?
I was as we were talking, I was thinking back to the Dennis Rader, the BTK killer in Kansas, his allocution. And I've watched it a number of times, about 45 minutes long. And he goes through and explains what he did, why he did, when he did, what he did, including all the sexual components, which makes a lot of people uncomfortable. But he described everything in detail as if he's reading off a laundry list. The guy's got like no inflection whatsoever. He talks about all of the killings that he did. He talked about them as his projects. He would get interested in a project, and it would be a lady who was maybe 55 or 60, lived alone. He never saw a man around there. And then that would be his project for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. I was hoping, and maybe it'll happen at the sentencing, that there will be some sort of questioning by Hitler, the way they did it in Kansas, and have the BTK style of allocution, where Kohberger would say, why did I do this? Or I don't know if he would ever actually say it, but I would like to hear him say something. I'm not expecting him to say anything about sympathy, because he doesn't feel sympathy at all, because everything is transactional. People are there to serve him, and it's a one-way ticket. But I would like to hear something from his lips other than guilty, 5 times, guilty, guilty, guilty.
Yeah, no, I'm sure with you. I would like to see that too. It'll be interesting to see the way that this goes down. When the families start talking, especially the Gonzalez family, I almost want the DA to hear it as much as Kohberger, in a way. Not that I'm comparing those two, but their grief on that day will be in large part due to the procedural steps taken by the district attorney, and I'm sure they're going to have something to say about that. As is, and then the court's going to let them do that. I would say, as is their right, but they have not adopted Marcy's law in the state of Idaho. So,
Matt, I hope that in no way, shape, or form this was about money.
Part of it, that's one of the arguments that you hear so often in this realm when you're talking about the death penalty. And that's one of the arguments that just drives me crazy, because in California, we have essentially, there's 2 potential sentences for special circumstances murder. One is the death penalty, and the other is what we call LWOP, or life without possibility of parole. Okay. Which, again, like we just saw with the Menendez brothers, doesn't necessarily mean life without possibility of parole, right? But when you're talking about a circumstance like this, right, where you're going to have a life commitment, you could have the same guards guarding the same prisoner who has the same meals, and they're going to get the same retirement benefits, and it's going to be the same number. And all these attorneys that fight these things, especially at the federal level, it's not like they're going to run off and join the Peace Corps. They're still going to keep their jobs, and they're just going to be challenging, the same issues, but they're going to be challenging the LWOP sentence, or they're going to be trying to get it reversed. So this whole idea, what a lot of people do in that debate is they say, look at how expensive it is to maintain death row, as if the murders never happened in the first place. And I hope I'm articulating that halfway decently. Like, the amount of money that you save. Now, Kohberger himself is apparently waiving his appellate rights as a part of this deal. So maybe they'll save $1 regarding the appellate process on this. But again, I think I speak for a lot of people when I say, when it comes to the butchery of 4 young lives at the beginning of their lives, these 4 beautiful young kids, that is my tax dollars well spent. The attorney general, and it is their job. And by the way, that those lawyers are salaried. They don't charge more based on that, as are a lot of the federal public defenders that will do these things on appeal. So, when you really drill down into the accounting, that's kind of a straw dog argument that you hear a lot. It is arguably more expensive. I'm sure that the death penalty costs more. However, it costs nowhere near as much more as they would have you believe.
Matt, one of the things that, and one of the people in the chat raised that thing that in no way, shape, or form was Bryan Kohberger stalking, or did he know any of these people? But the proof is in the pudding. 23 times he was reconning 1122 King Road. Do you want to withdraw that, Mr. Thompson? You want to withdraw that?
Not only that, But remember, he goes home and he gave him the thumbs up. He took that selfie where he's like within 24 hours more. There you go. Look at that guy. And look, as a prosecutor, I look at that. That is when you get into the penalty phase. So first you have the guilt phase. It's a bifurcated trial. Then you get into the penalty phase where the jury goes through that same process where they weigh and consider the aggravating factors versus the mitigating factors. Aggravating factors include the grief imposed upon the family. Whatever they could come up with, whether it's, I think they said he's somewhere on the autism spectrum. If so, this is an extremely high functioning guy. That thumbs up says it all. Like with that piece of evidence, there's virtually no expert. There's almost nothing the defense could do that's going to be able to outweigh the substantial aggravation in this case. I mean, look at that. I mean, I see that. I have cases, guys, that I wished I'd had a photo like that. You just can't ask for better evidence.
That's the classic trophy, because he wanted to relive that day for the rest of his life.
Yep.
So he took this selfie, and there are his bushy eyebrows again. Thing that she couldn't have seen. What do you think? Because you noticed in court he didn't have those bushy eyebrows any longer.
Well, I'll tell you what, that Bryan Kohberger, if he had a cell phone to do a selfie, he would have done a similar picture after that plea, guys, because he was the big winner from that. I hate to say it. I cannot tell you how much I hate to say it. After the fine work of the police and the FBI, like the cops did this one right. They did an excellent investigation. After the grief of those families, it just breaks my heart that emotion right there, that emotive photo that he just posted or that you just put up there, that's what he felt at the end of that plea.
Even when we watched, when he was pulled over, that, when he was driving back to Pennsylvania, I mean, I thought this spoke volumes too about who he was. I thought that I even saw a cut on his right wrist.
Hello. How you doing? How y'all doing today? Good. Take a look at your driver's license real quick if I could. See, he's right up on that van, man. He was right up on the back end of that van. Pulled you over for tailgating. Is this your car? Okay. Cool. Where are you headed?
Wow. They're looking for Thai food. I just did 4 murders, but I'm looking for Thai food.
Right, on Route 80, you're looking for Thai food.
And what's WSU?
It almost seemed to me like the father knew about this because he was giving some stupid answers too, we're going to WMSU, we're going for Thai food. And the other thing was, there's no way on this earth those police weren't told to pull him over. That's my opinion. The FBI said, "Hey, there's the car, pull him over." And the FBI, look, people lie. And there's no way he was, just, yes, he was tailgating and we saw him. He was pulled over twice.
He's pulled over twice. That's right.
Yeah. So they were looking for evidence as they were looking at him. And they should have just admitted it. I don't know what was the big deal. Yeah. The FBI called us and said, pull this guy over, but they didn't do that. So there was, that's one of the reasons I think that this gag order really hurt the case a lot, because why not let people know what the hell is going on? You think it would have hurt the case that much, Matt?
No, I really don't. And look, like I said, I've done a lot of high profile cases, and when you do questionnaires at the very beginning and you pass them out, and you can bring in as many jurors as you need, and I think the judge, I think he said he reserved over 1,000 spots. Yeah. If I remember that correctly. So that's a really big draw. So out of 1,000 people, a lot of times when you're in those cases, you think that the entire world is doing nothing but paying attention to your case, and you're surrounded by media and there's reporters in there. You'd be amazed, guys, how many people are like, yeah, I remember reading something about this, but I could put that aside and be fair. I remember something about a house or something about college kids, but the people are invested in their own lives, and and then the next question isn't, have you heard about the case? It's, can you put aside anything you've heard and follow the law exactly as I give it to you at the end of the case? And if they can do that, the guy was arrested, doesn't mean he did it. That you can always find a fair jury, and gag order or not. I mean, I don't think the gag order did much to suppress the media. In fact, it, like you said, I think it probably even increased the curiosity to it. And not only that, but it led to some people nakedly speculating, which probably has an even worse effect on a jury venire or a jury pool, because you got people who don't know, the reports haven't been released, the person's not talking, and so they're left with speculation, and that's probably a lot more dangerous to the fairness of the process if you're talking about jurors.
Even the with Kaylee Gonzalez, early in the investigation, they accused her boyfriend. Remember that? Oh, her boyfriend. That's why he fled town. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, there was a professor at the school that somebody
Yeah.
accused too. There's some online
Right.
sleuths that try to blame him. And there's a great documentary called Don't F with Cats. I don't know if you've seen that, where a bunch of online sleuths solved a murder in Canada, and it's awesome. It's for your viewers. It's called Don't F with Cats. It's on Netflix. It's a fascinating documentary. But there's a downside to that too, the interest in true crime and the online sleuths. And somebody put together their sort of amateur armchair sort of breakdown, and they accused some poor professor of doing this, and it was awful. Like, just like the four people they wanted to point their finger at, that the court very properly shut down in this case. The defense was going to point their finger at four other individuals as potential suspects, and the court wouldn't allow that, which was, I think that was one of the later rulings that he made. Everything, guys, was going the prosecution's way on this, and I don't get it.
But you know why? Because Ann Taylor was throwing spaghetti at the wall, seeing if it would stick.
Yeah.
And it was her. What she look, she was trying to get a stall the case, and he said no to that. It's been 2.5 years, and if people didn't think that's not long enough to be prepared, if she wasn't prepared, shame on her. She should have asked for more resources.
Yeah.
But and who does that hurt when you give more time? It hurts the families of these kids that are waiting for this case to go to trial. It hurts the community. And, just to get back at talking about some of these online sleuths, we call a lot of these people the pro-burgers. There were so many people would come into our chat. He didn't do it. You guys cops, you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, none of us know what we're talking about. He's got a law degree. We all did. I did 27 years. He did 21 years in NYPD. We've been to, I've been to hundreds of murder scenes. I don't know shit. You're right. You sitting in front of your keyboard, you're a keyboard warrior. I should listen to you,
Well, are they all going to apologize for that now? Now that Kohberger, we heard.
Of course not. There's still one idiot that's still doing it.
There's a thing. It's one of my favorite. They call it the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's literally, if you're an idiot, how would you know? If you're, and everybody wants to be the smartest person on the block, and everybody wants to come up with a conspiracy theory. And you notice a lot of people that cling to conspiracy theories the hardest, or OJ didn't do it. That's one of my other favorites. They want to be the smartest person, and they're the one that's got it figured out. And we just saw that with the Menendez phenomenon. Kim Kardashian and that Netflix special, and all of a sudden everybody runs off thinking they're advocating on behalf of victims of sexual abuse, and in fact what they're doing is they're making every rapist and child molester and killer in California now line up for their resentencing hearing. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's an actual scientific psychological principle, and basically if you're a dummy, you're too dumb to know it, and that's what we see in this. So
absolutely. I just want to also let people know this is Matt's book, The Book of Murder. The Book of Murder serves up a front row seat for true crime fans wanting to know the rest of the story. I've read it. He actually sent me a copy for free. I don't think he's going to send you a copy for free, but it's really an interesting.
I paid for my copy.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I paid for my copy.
I'm a co-host. Anyway, this is Matt in his courtroom look. He had a little shorter hair back then, but it's really fascinating, the book. And Matt, it's so funny because I've played so many times your interview with Vargas, and where you say, in fact, I'll put it back up on the screen for old time's sake. But I've had people say that guy's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's so. I go, yeah, you're right. He's an idiot. He's got a law degree. He's one of the best prosecutors in the nation. Absolute moron. And here it is.
I'm joined by former homicide prosecutor Matt Murphy. Matt, We know that some of the families the victims' families do want the death penalty. These crimes were heinous. But yeah, and they don't blame that. I don't blame them. But how does a prosecutor make this decision?
So a prosecutor under these circumstances will weigh the aggravating versus mitigating circumstances. It's essentially the same job that a jury will be asked to do. And this case is so overwhelmingly awful, for lack of a better term. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure within the DA's office to actually seek the death penalty.
And the evidence seems to be very strong. I mean, it's not circumstantial. There's DNA evidence, there's cell phone evidence, there's a lot of evidence here.
The evidence against Bryan Kohberger is overwhelming.
People didn't like that you said that. That you were an idiot on our show, at least, you know.
Well,
Like,
I've got more than one ex-girlfriend who would definitely agree that I am an idiot. But when it comes to murder cases, I mean, look, I was a prosecutor for 26 years, and I'm not the second coming of Clarence Darrow by any stretch, but I have a lot of experience. I prosecuted 53 murder cases, 2 juries. And I've done 133 jury trials. I've walked 100 crime scenes personally. You know, I have seen a lot, and there's, look, at the end of the day, I guess I can thank Bryan Kohberger for proving me right. Yeah, and look, I can certainly take the heat. If somebody wants to criticize, you know, maybe I'm an idiot, but I was right this time, as both of you guys were. He did it, and he's admitted doing it. So,
And you know, Matt, there's still people out there going, the pressure that law enforcement put on him there's still people out there still being pro-burgers, right?
oh yeah, Froburgers, right? Yeah, Dunning-Kruger. Your viewers can look it up. It's great.
Mike, you have anything to say?
No, I just want to say that looking at this case, you know, I'm against the death penalty just on philosophical principle. But I think one of the problems with it is that the built-in appellate, you know, procedures. You have the state you've got required state appeals. Then you get a habeas corpus appeal in the local district court and federal court. Then I think Idaho is covered by the Ninth Circuit, I think. So,
Yep.
You know, unfortunately, whatever, you know, effect that the death penalty could have on criminals thinking that, oh, I might actually get the death penalty, is lost, because they'll end up doing 25 years. I said this the other day on the show, that the last guy that Idaho tried to give him the death penalty with the needle, the vein kept collapsing. They were trying needles in his chest, in his legs. He ended up dying of old age in Idaho prison. He'd been on death row for like 35 years. So,
well, all of that is certainly true. The
terrible.
way I look at these is, it's not, you know, the deterrent effect. You never hear anybody argue that about, like, child molesters. Show me there's a deterrence. Or robbers. Show me the statistic on deterrence. And everything you just said is right, Mike. You know, the appellate process is brutal, and a lot of these cases do come back, including Rodney Alcala, my dating game killer case. I tried that. It had to be tried 3 times before it finally stuck. But we looked at these cases as instances of individual justice. It wasn't about what anybody else is going to do. It was justice for the victims in each individual case. So again, there are, like I said, there are many people who very earnestly and for good reasons are opposed to the death penalty. You know, I have nothing but respect for that. Me personally, you know, I tried 8 of these. So, you know, I went up on the other side of that. But, you know, again, perfectly good reasons back and forth to have honest debates. But a lot of times, you know, when you're talking about those groups that we just heard about at the beginning, you know, the Project Innocence, ACLU,
Southern
Amnesty
Poverty
International.
Law Center.
Yeah, that's right. You hear arguments that are not, in my opinion, based in truth, and that's you know. And I've debated this topic in law schools before, and I'd go and have really respectful debates with some really good defense lawyers in Orange County at some of our local law schools, where we'd kind of talk about it academically and break down, you know, some of the more getting into the nitty gritty of some of the statistics and some of the reasons for and against. And I think that's that there's a place for that seems to have been lost.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, in this case, the reason they got the plea was the death penalty. There's no
Yeah.
way on this earth, he was going to plead to anything if there was no death penalty on the table. So you can argue right there it's a deterrence.
Oh, I think that's right. Yeah.
True.
So they came because he didn't want to be looking down the barrel of an AK-47 or whatever they use in the firing squad in Idaho. I mean, that seems sort of barbaric, a firing squad, but everything's barbaric. Oh, you missed the vein. Oh, this is cruel and unusual.
Yeah, I'll tell you what was barbaric was this murder scene.
Sure.
Yes.
Yes. It was helter-skelter in that place. You just know it. And that's another thing that we will never get to see now. The public will never see the horror of that. Maybe that's a good thing.
Matt, some people in the chat before, I should have brought it up, that they said that, that was not wrong that they got rid of the house. Yes, it was. Because
Terrible.
The crime scene where jurors can actually go through and see where it happened, where the perpetrator came into the building, what his mindset was in stalking this location, how he knew that glass door was unlocked. I mean, all of those things they could see firsthand. But instead, some cowardly bitch at the University of Idaho concurred with the prosecutor or whatever, and they knocked his house down. That was disgraceful.
Yeah, well, and remember, Bryan Kohberger has a right as well to have that walkthrough. Now, his defense team stipulated to that, but that was an immediate issue on appeal. That was going to be appealed for the next 25 years. And when the university decided to do that, and it was the university, they didn't say we need more money. It's a revenue stream. We need more housing for students. It was we're tearing the house down so students can heal, which is just that's a ridiculous reason to destroy a crime scene involving a case of this importance to the community and to those families and to Bryan Kohberger. So you're absolutely right, and I disagree with the people that commented on that.
Matt, I was just looking up what colleges cost. Do you know some colleges are over $100,000 a year now?
Oh yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. And I looked at where my sons went. My sons went to Elon University, North Carolina. I think when they went there, it was probably 8-10 years ago. It was like $45,000. It's now like $70,000 a year. And
I think I just finished paying off my student loans from law school, and I'm already retired from the DA's office. So. It's a substantial investment for sure, and it's only worse these days for those kids.
Well, but my whole point was that's what it was about. It wasn't about the house and the students were scared they wanted to heal. It's that the University of Idaho wanted more checks into their coffers from students.
I don't know what they were thinking. I really don't. But that I was absolutely dead set against that, and I was really surprised when that happened.
100%. Matt, I want to thank you so much. I think this is the second time you came on. I'll show some. There you are in action in court.
Younger and more spry. Look at that.
I think you have several nice suits too. So
thank you.
You are over there, and it's probably nice now not to have to wear a suit. And I know you're a big surfer. You're always surfing out. Are you in California right now?
No, I'm in New York City right now.
Oh, okay. I should have noticed when I saw out the window before. So, but. Yeah, I mean, this was one hell of an interesting case. And for those asking, the sentencing is July 23rd. And they actually gave a second day in case it goes over, because they want to make sure every family member that wants to speak gets a chance to speak. So they booked the 23rd and the 24th. And folks, if you're not subscribed to this show, hit the subscribe button, give us a thumbs up. Share us with your friends and family. And also, if you want to contribute financially, we have a Patreon with 4 different levels. And we also have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels. And you can support this channel. Mike, I'm going to go to you first since you talked the least. Your final thoughts, and then I'll go to Matt, and we'll.
I just want to say thanks to Matt, because I learned a lot about what goes on into making that decision. Because I always look at, how many people were killed? What does it fall within the mitigation range? What their ages are? Is it a child? Is it a senior citizen like me? But there's a lot more that goes on. And Matt, I just want to say thank you again for appearing on the show and giving us that behind the scenes look as to how that death penalty decision is actually made. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, guys. And look, I love the show, so I'm happy to come back on the next one. We should talk about Rex Huerman and Go-Go Beach someday.
Oh
That's
my God, we'll need
that's a
about
great
10
one.
shows to.
Oh,
we'll need
yeah.
about 10 shows to do. I just want to address someone in the chat. Just me. The house stood for 3 winters exposed to the elements, had been tore up, asbestos and lead found, a health hazard that the jurors would have never been allowed to walk through. Just me. I've walked through hell. I've walked through the grounds of the World Trade Center for 10, 15 days after the attacks. I walked through fresh kills, picking out bodies from there. I'm still alive, So I don't care what was in that damn house. The jury should have been allowed to walk through it. I've been in heinous crime scenes with blood slipping in biological fluids. So I don't want to hear about that argument. Matt, your thoughts?
Yeah, on that comment, you want my thoughts?
No,
Look,
yeah, I mean, you comment on the same comment. I think it's ridiculous.
Yeah, look, it's it was habitable until the murders, but now all of a sudden nobody can even step foot in it. That's a bogus argument. Sorry, no offense to the person who made that comment. That's just wrong. You can have jury walkthroughs anywhere. They could throw masks on them if need be, and it's not even so much that the jury was going to do it. It's that preserving it in case it became legally necessary or factually necessary for them to make the decision preserves that. It means it's not an issue on appeal. It means that whether they ever wanted to do the walkthrough or not, it was something that would have been available, and that ensures the case against reversal based on something like destroying the crime scene.
Well, I couldn't have said it any better. I should have went to law school. Maybe I could talk like you, but instead I talk like a cop, 50-toed and turd. Make it right, Anyway, for one last time, this is Matt's book, The Book of Murder. It's really a fantastic book, and it keep you. You probably read it in one night. That's the only bad thing about it, because you can't put it down. Anyway, I want to thank you, Matt, again for coming on the show. I know you're busy. You're the legal analyst for ABC News, and that means you get paid, because every once in a while they let me be a talking head, and that means I don't get paid.
Yeah, I won't be flying around on my jet and the money that they pay me. I don't have a jet, but I love ABC. They've treated me very well, and I'm here in New York actually to do some stuff on this case tomorrow. So yeah,
you can buy a couple of new surfboards though with what they pay you, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, folks, this is Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I thought I was on this show and I thought it was fascinating. Matt, thank you so much, and Professor Mike Geary, thank you so much.
Thanks again, guys, and thanks to your viewers for watching us and letting me rant.
Absolutely, you did great. Have a good night, everyone, and God bless.
Good night, guys.
One episode just ain't enough.